Everyone thought his father's storage unit was just filled with worthless junk. But when he broke through the concrete floor after weeks of clearing it out, what he found underneath changed his family's life forever. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Riverside Storage Facility, turning the air thick and heavy with heat. Marcus Webb stood before Unit 47, his work shirt already soaked through with sweat, despite it being barely past noon. In his arms, his 3-year-old daughter Sophia shifted restlessly. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Her small fingers clutching the collar of his shirt, while she whimpered softly about being hungry. Behind him, parked in the sparse shade of a dying oak tree, sat his 15-year-old pickup truck, its engine ticking as it cooled, the passenger door held closed with wire, because the latch had broken months ago. The inspection sticker on the windshield had expired in March. It was now September, but Marcus couldn't afford the repairs needed to pass inspection, much less the fine for driving illegally. He had $43 in his checking account, a maxed-out credit card, and a stack of past-due notices stuffed in his glove compartment that he'd stopped opening because seeing the numbers only made the knot in his stomach tighter. The eviction notice taped to his apartment door gave him 12 days. 12 days to come up with $2,400 in back rent, or he and Sophia would be on the street. The storage unit key felt heavy in his palm, a dull brass thing attached to a laminated tag that read, "Final notice, payment required, or contents will be auctioned." His father, William Webb, had died 4 months ago. A quiet death in a VA hospital, alone except for the night nurse who'd called Marcus at 2 a.m. to deliver the news in a voice professionally sympathetic but ultimately detached. Marcus had made it to the hospital 20 minutes too late. His father was already gone, the machines disconnected, the body growing cold beneath a standard issue sheet. They'd never had an easy relationship. William Webb had been a hard man, made harder by whatever he'd seen in Vietnam, by the dissolution of his marriage when Marcus was 7, by decades of manual labor that left his hands gnarled and his back permanently bent. In his final years, he'd withdrawn almost completely, living in a studio apartment on the wrong side of town, working odd jobs when his health permitted, and spending his evenings alone with memories he never shared. Marcus had tried to visit, especially after Sophia was born. He'd wanted his father to know his granddaughter, to see that despite everything, the Webb family line continued. But William had always been distant during those visits, uncomfortable with the baby's presence, as if tenderness was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Now, 4 months after the funeral that only Marcus and 2 of his father's old army buddies had attended, the storage facility had tracked him down. His father had rented this unit for 23 years, paying $85 a month religiously until his health declined and the payments stopped. The facility had given Marcus 60 days to settle the account, or they'd auction the contents. That deadline had passed 3 weeks ago. This morning, the facility manager, a woman named Carol with tired eyes and a smoker's rasp, had called him, "Mr. Webb, I've held off the auction as long as I can, out of respect for your father. He was a good tenant for over 2 decades, never missed a payment until the end. But my boss is pushing me now. You need to clear it out by the end of the week, or it goes to auction on Saturday." Marcus had begged for one more extension, explained about Sophia, about the eviction, about the fact that he was barely keeping his head above water, working 2 part-time jobs that together still didn't equal 1 living wage. Carol had sighed, a sound that carried the weight of too many similar conversations. "I'm sorry, Marcus, I truly am. But business is business. End of the week, that's the best I can do." So here he stood, and with his daughter in his arms, and his truck burning its last tank of gas, about to open a storage unit filled with what he assumed would be junk. His father had never been a collector of valuable things. He'd been a man who fixed other people's broken appliances, who wore the same 3 shirts until they literally fell apart, who drove his truck until it had 300,000 miles, and then drove it some more. What could possibly be in this unit worth saving? "Daddy, I'm hungry," Sophia said again, her voice small and plaintive. "I know, baby girl. I know," Marcus murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead that was hot from the afternoon sun. "We'll get something to eat soon, I promise." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The $43 in his account needed to last until Friday, when he'd get paid from his night shift at the warehouse, a whopping $180 that would immediately be consumed by gas, groceries, and a fraction of what he owed his landlord. He'd already sold his television, his laptop, his father's watch, anything of even marginal value. There was nothing left to sell except his truck, and without it, he couldn't get to either of his jobs. Marcus shifted Sophia to his hip, unlocked the heavy padlock, and pulled up the rolling metal door. It resisted, grinding against its track with the screech of metal on metal that hadn't been oiled in years. The sound echoed across the facility, drawing a glance from an old man loading boxes into a van 3 units down. The door finally gave way, revealing the interior of Unit 47. Dust hung thick in the air, illuminated by the harsh afternoon light that now flooded the space. Marcus coughed, waving his hand to clear the particles that swirled like tiny galaxies in the disturbed air. As his eyes adjusted, his heart sank. The unit was packed floor to ceiling with exactly what he'd feared. Junk. Cardboard boxes, warped and water-stained, were stacked haphazardly against the walls. Old furniture, the kind found on curbs with free signs, filled the middle space. A broken dresser, with missing drawers, leaned against a stained couch. Plastic bins, their contents obscured by years of accumulated grime, were piled in precarious towers. Tools, rusty and scattered, lay among piles of yellowed newspapers. "Damn it, Dad," Marcus whispered, though whether in frustration or grief, he couldn't say. Sophia squirmed in his arms, reaching toward an old teddy bear sitting atop a nearby box, its fur matted and one eye missing. "No, sweetie, that's dirty," Marcus said gently, pulling her hand back. He stepped into the unit, his boots crunching on debris that had fallen from the overstuffed boxes. The smell hit him immediately. That distinctive odor of things long forgotten, of mildew and dust and time itself. This was going to take days to clear out. Days he didn't have. Days that would require renting a dumpster he couldn't afford. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He shifted Sophia again, pulled it out, and saw a text from Jennifer, his ex-wife, and Sophia's mother. Child support was due yesterday. "Don't make me go back to court." His jaw tightened. The $400 monthly child support, ordered by a judge who apparently thought Marcus was capable of producing money from thin air, was just one more bill in a stack that had long since stopped fitting in his wallet. Jennifer had primary custody, a fact that had been decided when Marcus lost his job as a mechanic 18 months ago and couldn't afford a lawyer to fight it properly. He got Sophia every other weekend, and one evening a week, visits that were the only light in his otherwise dark existence, but which cost him gas money he didn't have, and required him to miss shifts at work he couldn't afford to miss. "Can't get blood from a stone, Jennifer," he muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket without responding. Sophia had begun to cry now, tired and hungry and uncomfortable in the heat. Marcus's own stomach was empty. He'd skipped breakfast to save money, and his head throbbed with the beginning of a headache that was part hunger, part stress, part the crushing weight of a life that seemed determined to grind him into dust. He almost turned around, almost locked the unit back up, and walked away. Let them auction it. Let someone else deal with this mess. What did it matter? But something made him stay. Maybe it was the memory of his father, difficult as their relationship had been. Maybe it was the desperate hope that somewhere in this pile of refuse there might be something, anything, worth enough to buy him a little more time before everything completely fell apart. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Or maybe it was simply that he had nowhere else to go, no other options, no plan B. "All right," he said aloud, though Sophia was the only one listening. "Let's see what you left me, Dad." He carried Sophia back to the truck, settled her in the passenger seat with the door propped open for air, and gave her the last granola bar from his glove compartment. It was smashed and probably stale, but she accepted it gratefully, her tears stopping as she focused on the simple pleasure of food. "You stay right here where I can see you, okay? Don't move from this spot." "Okay, Daddy," she said, her mouth already full. Marcus returned to the unit and began the grim work of sorting through his father's possessions. The first few boxes contained clothes, decades old and moth-eaten. He threw them directly into a pile for the dumpster. The next boxes held magazines from the 1980 seconds and 90 seconds, their pages yellow and brittle. More trash. An hour passed, then 2. The sun tracked across the sky, and the shadows lengthened. Marcus's shirt was completely soaked through now, his hands filthy, his back aching from the repetitive motion of lifting, sorting, discarding. Sophia had fallen asleep in the truck, exhausted by the heat and the boredom. He checked on her every few minutes, grateful she was resting, but worried about leaving her, even for these brief periods. The furniture was all worthless, broken beyond repair, or so dated that even thrift stores wouldn't take it. The tools were rusted solid. The boxes of papers were mostly bills and receipts from decades past, meaningless now. As the afternoon wore into evening, Marcus's initial hope, fragile as it had been, evaporated completely. This unit contained nothing of value. It was exactly what it appeared to be: the accumulated refuse of a man who hadn't known how to let go of things, who had paid $85 a month for 23 years to store garbage, $23,460. That's what his father had spent on this unit over 2 decades. Money that could have been saved, invested, used to improve his life or help his son. Instead, it had gone to preserving trash. The bitterness that rose in Marcus's throat surprised him with its intensity. But as the sun began to set and the facility's automatic lights flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the half-empty unit, Marcus noticed something. The back wall didn't look right. He'd cleared away most of the junk now, stacking the salvageable items, which numbered exactly 3. A military footlocker that was locked, an old toolbox that might contain something useful, and a plastic bin of photo albums he'd set aside to look through later. The rest, mountains of it, sat in garbage bags and loose piles waiting for a dumpster he still couldn't afford. But it was the back wall that caught his attention. In the fading light, he could see that the concrete floor in the rear section of the unit looked different from the front. The color was slightly off, the texture not quite matching. He approached slowly, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he couldn't explain. Kneeling down, he ran his hand across the concrete. It was rough, clearly poured at a different time than the rest of the floor. The seam, where the old concrete met, the new was visible now that he looked closely. Someone had dug up the back third of the unit and repoured the floor. His father. It had to be his father. But why? What reason would William Webb have to dig up and repair a section of concrete floor in a storage unit? Marcus stood, his mind racing. Around him, the storage facility was quiet. Most of the other tenants had left for the day, and the office was closed. Carol had told him he could work as late as he needed, that the facility was secure, and his key would let him out through the pedestrian gate. He walked back to the truck where Sophia still slept, her small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of exhausted childhood. He pulled out his phone and called his only real friend, a guy named Danny who'd stuck by him even after Marcus's life had fallen apart. "Marcus, my man. What's up?" Danny's voice was cheerful, the sound of someone whose biggest problem was probably choosing what to have for dinner. "I need a favor," Marcus said without preamble. "Big one. Name it. Can you watch Sophia for a few hours? Maybe overnight if it comes to that. I'm at my dad's storage unit, and I've found something weird. I need to dig." There was a pause. "Dig? Like, literally dig?" "Yeah. The floor's been repoured. Something's under it. I need to know what." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "You think your old man buried something valuable?" "I don't know what I think. But I'm out of options, Danny. I'm out of money, out of time, out of luck. If there's even a chance that whatever's under this concrete could help me keep my daughter off the street, I have to check." "All right. Bring her over. Paula will be happy to have her. She can sleep in the guest room." Relief flooded through Marcus. "Thank you. Seriously. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything, brother. That's what friends are for." An hour later, after dropping a still sleeping Sophia at Danny and Paula's house with profuse thanks and promises to pick her up in the morning, Marcus returned to the storage unit. He'd stopped at a hardware store, using $30 of his precious remaining funds to buy a small sledgehammer and a heavy-duty chisel. The investment left him with $13 in his account, but the alternative was walking away from whatever mystery his father had left behind. The facility was dark now, the few remaining lights creating islands of illumination in a sea of shadows. Marcus's unit was at the end of a row, away from the main building, which gave him some privacy, but also made him acutely aware of his isolation. He pulled the door down behind him, leaving it open just enough for air, and turned on the battery-powered lantern he'd brought from his truck. The repoured section of concrete stared up at him, a puzzle his father had left, whether intentionally or not. Marcus positioned the chisel at the edge of the new concrete and swung the sledgehammer. The impact jarred his arms and sent a sharp crack echoing through the metal walls of the unit. Again and again. The concrete was thick, poured properly, which meant his father had known what he was doing. This wasn't a hasty patch job. This was deliberate. Marcus worked for hours, swinging the hammer until his shoulders screamed, his hands blistered, and sweat poured down his face despite the cooling night air. Slowly, painfully, the concrete began to give way. Chips flew, cracks spread, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, a large section broke free. Beneath the concrete was dirt, loose, recently disturbed dirt compared to the compacted earth around it. Marcus set down the hammer and began to dig with his hands, scooping out handfuls of earth that still smelled of dust and time. 2 feet down, his fingers hit something solid, something metal. His heart hammered in his chest as he cleared away more dirt, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a military-style ammo can, the kind used to keep contents dry and protected. With trembling hands, Marcus pulled the can from its earthen hiding place. It was heavy, much heavier than it should be if it were empty. The lid was sealed with some kind of rubberized coating, protection against moisture. He carried it into the light of the lantern, his breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the wild hope that had suddenly ignited in his chest. The hope that maybe, just maybe, his father had left him something that mattered, something that could save him. Marcus sat on the concrete floor, the ammo can between his knees, and began to work on opening it. The seal resisted, hardened by years underground, but eventually it gave way with a soft pop. He lifted the lid, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, were stacks and stacks of $100 bills. The bills weren't new. They were dated from the 1,980 seconds and 90 seconds, but they were real. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled out the first stack. Then, another, and another. Beneath the cash were documents, official-looking papers, sealed in a heavy plastic bag, and beneath those, a letter in his father's distinctive angular handwriting. Marcus set the letter aside for a moment, unable to process it yet, and focused on counting the money. When he finished, he had to count again because the number seemed impossible. $180,000. $180,000 in cash, buried under the concrete floor of a storage unit his father had rented for 23 years, hidden away from the world, from his family, from his son, who was now on the verge of homelessness. Marcus didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His hands covered his face, and a sound escaped him that was both. His father, the man who had lived in poverty, who had worked manual labor jobs until his body gave out, who had died alone in a VA hospital, had been sitting on enough money to change everything. Finally, when he could breathe again, Marcus picked up the letter. The envelope was marked simply, Marcus. Inside, on lined notebook paper, his father had written, "Son, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found what I spent half my life protecting. I know our relationship wasn't what either of us wanted. I know I was hard on you, distant, not the father you deserved. The war took something from me, something I couldn't get back, and I'm sorry you paid the price for that. This money isn't from anything illegal, though I'm sure you'll wonder. It's from a job I did in 1979, 6 months after I got back from Vietnam. I was hired by a man I'll call Mr. Chen to provide security for a business transaction. I won't go into details because they don't matter anymore. Everyone involved is long dead. But at the end of the job, Mr. Chen paid me in cash, more money than I'd ever seen, $200,000. He said it was payment for my discretion as much as my service. I was supposed to disappear with it, start a new life, somewhere far away. But I had you. You were just a baby. And I couldn't leave. Your mother and I were already falling apart. But you were innocent in all of it. So I kept the money hidden, planning to use it for your future, for college, for giving you opportunities I never had. But then your mother left, and took you with her. And the court gave her custody. I convinced myself you were better off without me, that my darkness would only hurt you. So I kept working my dead-end jobs, kept the money hidden, telling myself I was protecting it for when you really needed it. The documents with the cash prove where it came from. Contracts, receipts, everything legal that I could keep. I want you to know it's clean money, earned honestly, even if the circumstances were unusual. I also kept some of Mr. Chen's contact information in case you ever need to verify the story. Son, I know I failed you in life. I was never the father I should have been. But maybe, in death, I can finally do something right. Use this money. Take care of yourself. And my granddaughter. I saw her that one time you brought her to visit, and she was beautiful, so full of light. Give her the life I couldn't give you. I'm sorry for the distance. Sorry for the coldness. Sorry for not being stronger than my demons. But I'm not sorry for keeping this safe for you, even if it meant living like I had nothing. Because you were never nothing to me, Marcus. You were everything. I just didn't know how to show it. I love you, son. I always did. Dad. The letter fell from Marcus's hands as tears finally came, hot and fierce, streaming down his face in the dim light of the storage unit. His father, the hard, distant man who'd seemed incapable of warmth, had spent 23 years paying $85 a month to protect Marcus's future, had lived in poverty while sitting on a fortune, all because in his damaged, complicated way, he'd been trying to take care of his son. Marcus cried for the relationship they'd never had, for the words left unspoken until it was too late, for the father who'd loved him in the only way he knew how. But he also cried with relief, with the sudden release of months of crushing pressure, with the knowledge that he could now give Sophia a safe home, food in her belly, a childhood free from the fear that had haunted his own recent years. He sat there on the concrete floor of Unit 47 until the tears stopped and his breathing steadied. Then, he carefully repacked the money, sealed the ammo can, and loaded it into his truck along with the footlocker and photo albums. The rest of the unit could wait. Tomorrow he would call Carol and arrange for the facility to dispose of the remaining contents. But tonight, he drove to an all-night diner, ordered a real meal for the first time in weeks, and sat in the booth with his father's letter on the table, reading it again and again. At 2 a.m., he checked into a modest hotel room, double-locked the door with the ammo can safely stowed under the bed, and finally, slept without the weight of drowning pressing on his chest. The next morning, Marcus picked up Sophia from Danny and Paula's house, just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed impossibly beautiful after the darkness of recent months. His daughter ran to him with open arms, and he lifted her up, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the simple miracle of her existence. "Did you find something, Daddy?" she asked, with the intuitive wisdom of children who sense when something fundamental has shifted. "Yeah, baby girl, I found something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Grandpa left us a present." Over breakfast at a local pancake house, where Sophia delighted in chocolate chip pancakes, and Marcus ate until he was actually full for the first time in months, he began to plan. The money needed to be handled carefully, responsibly. It was enough to change their lives, but only if he didn't squander it on impulsive decisions made in the euphoria of sudden wealth. First priority, clear the back rent and secure their apartment. Second, pay off the child support arrears before Jennifer could drag him back to court. Third, fix the truck and get it properly inspected. Fourth, and this was harder to quantify, start building a stable future for Sophia. That afternoon, after depositing the money in a new bank account, watching the teller's eyes widen at the amount of cash, Marcus stood in his landlord's office with a cashier's check for the full amount owed, plus 3 months in advance. The landlord, a balding man named Kramer, who'd been alternating between threats and condescension for weeks, actually smiled as he marked the account paid in full and handed Marcus a receipt. "Glad to see you got your situation sorted out, Webb," Kramer said, his tone suggesting he'd never doubted it. Marcus just nodded, pocketing the receipt, and the keys he'd been afraid would be taken from him. Next was Jennifer. That meeting was more complicated. They sat in the parking lot of the family court building, where she'd threatened to file a contempt motion, Sophia playing on the nearby playground where Marcus could keep an eye on her. "I have the money," Marcus said without preamble, handing her a check for the full arrears, plus the current month. All of it, caught up completely. Jennifer took the check, examined it, and for a moment something softened in her expression. They'd loved each other once, before Marcus's job loss and depression, and her frustration and resentment had poisoned everything between them. "Where did you get this?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. "My father. He left me something I didn't know about." She nodded slowly. "I heard he passed. I'm sorry. I know you two didn't have an easy relationship." "No. But he came through when it mattered." Jennifer looked toward the playground where Sophia was climbing on the jungle gym, her laughter carrying on the breeze. "She loves you, you know. She talks about you all the time." "I love her more than life itself," Marcus said simply. "I know you do. And Marcus, I know I've been hard on you lately. The court stuff, the demands for money. I was scared too, trying to make ends meet, raising her mostly alone." Her voice softened. "Maybe we can figure out a better arrangement, something more flexible now that you're stable again." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it didn't erase the pain of the custody battle, but it was a tentative peace offering. Marcus accepted it with a nod. "I'd like that. She deserves to have both of us in her life without all the fighting." Over the following weeks, Marcus's life stabilized in ways he'd almost forgotten were possible. He quit one of his part-time jobs, keeping the warehouse position, but negotiating better hours now that he wasn't desperately clinging to every available shift. The truck got fixed properly. New brakes and a complete engine tune-up that left it running better than it had in 5 years. He bought Sophia new clothes and toys, delighting in her excitement over things as simple as crayons and coloring books. He stocked their apartment with real food, healthy meals instead of the bare minimum. He paid down his credit card debt and started, for the first time in his adult life, a savings account. But the most important change was internal. The constant gnawing anxiety that had become his baseline emotional state began to recede. He could breathe again. He could think beyond just surviving to the next day. He could imagine a future. One evening, after putting Sophia to bed in their now secure apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his father's letter and the documents from the ammo can spread before him. The story his father had told was verifiable. The documents included contracts signed by Marcus's father and a man named David Chen, owner of an import-export business that had operated in the 1,970 and 80 seconds. The payments were recorded, along with notarized statements about the nature of the work, providing personal security during high-value transactions. It was all legitimate, unusual but legal. Marcus did some research and found that David Chen had died in 1995, and his business had been sold off years ago. The man's son, Michael Chen, now ran a successful tech company in Silicon Valley. On impulse, Marcus drafted an email to Michael Chen through his company's website. He explained who he was, mentioned his father's connection to David Chen, and asked if Michael knew anything about the arrangement from decades ago. He didn't expect a response, but 3 days later, his phone rang with a California number. "Marcus Webb? This is Michael Chen. I got your email about your father, William Webb." The voice was educated, professional, tinged with curiosity. "Yes, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you'd know anything about it." "I know everything about it." My father spoke of William Webb several times over the years, always with great respect. He said Webb was the most honorable man he'd ever hired, that he trusted him with his life during some very difficult business dealings. Michael paused. "My father left me a letter before he died, explaining some of the unusual aspects of his early business ventures. Your father's name was in it, along with instructions that if any member of the Webb family ever needed verification of the legitimacy of those payments, I was to provide it without question." Relief washed through Marcus. So, the money was legitimate? Completely. My father made his fortune through hard work and sometimes risky ventures, but he was scrupulously legal. He paid your father a premium for discretion and security during a time when his business was vulnerable to competitors. That your father kept the money secure for his family all these years speaks to his character. They talked for another 20 minutes, Michael sharing stories his father had told about William Webb's professionalism and integrity. By the end of the call, Marcus had not just verification, but a new understanding of his father as a young man, before the war and the broken marriage and the decades of hardship had worn him down. That night, Marcus drove to the cemetery where his father was buried in the veterans section, a simple military headstone marking the grave. He stood there in the cool evening air, hands in his pockets, and finally said the things he'd wished he'd said while his father was alive. "I found it, Dad. The money, the letter, everything. I know you thought you failed me, but you didn't. Not in the way that really matters. You kept faith, kept protecting me even when I didn't know it, even when it cost you everything." Marcus's voice cracked. "I wish we'd been closer. I wish I'd understood you better, been less angry about the distance between us. But I get it now. You did the best you could with what the war left you. And your best was better than I ever knew." He stood there until full dark, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. His father would never meet Sophia, as a grandfather should, would never see her grow up, would never know how completely his final act of protection had saved his son's family. But somehow, Marcus felt that maybe, in whatever way such things worked, his father knew. Months passed. Marcus used a portion of the money to enroll in community college, working toward a degree in business management. He'd always been smart, just never had the opportunity or stability to pursue education. Now he did. Sophia thrived. Her preschool teachers commented on how much happier she seemed, how her anxiety had diminished now that her home life was stable. Jennifer and Marcus worked out a more flexible custody arrangement, and slowly, tentatively, they rebuilt something that wasn't romance but was mutual respect and cooperation in raising their daughter. Danny and Paula remained his closest friends, celebrating his success and never asking for anything, despite all the help they'd given. Marcus helped them out anyway, paying for the transmission repair on Danny's car when it broke down, insisting it was just paying back what friends do for each other. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after finding the ammo can, Marcus took Sophia to a park near the cemetery. She played on the swings while he sat on a nearby bench, watching her. She looked so much like her grandmother, his mother, whom he barely remembered. The same curls, the same quick smile. "Daddy, push me higher," she called. And he stood, moving behind her swing to send her soaring into the bright autumn air. Her laughter echoed across the park, pure and joyful, the sound of childhood as it should be. As he pushed her, Marcus thought about his father, about the complicated legacy of pain and protection, distance and devotion. William Webb had been a broken man in many ways, but in the end, he'd done what mattered most. He'd taken care of his son. That evening, back at their apartment with Sophia asleep in her room, Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the letter he'd been drafting for weeks. It was addressed to Sophia, to be given to her when she was old enough to understand. In it, he told her the story of her grandfather, of the storage unit and the hidden ammo can, of the money that had saved them. But more importantly, he wrote about love, the messy, complicated kind that doesn't always look like the movies, the kind that shows up in sealed metal cans buried under concrete, in decades of silent sacrifice. In the words, "I love you, son," written by a man who'd found it impossible to say them aloud. "Your grandfather wasn't perfect," Marcus wrote. "He carried wounds he couldn't heal, and those wounds affected everyone around him, including me. But he loved us in the way he could, and in the end, that love saved us. I want you to know that family is complicated. People are complicated. But love persists, even through distance, even through pain, even through death. Your grandfather taught me that, even if he couldn't teach me anything else." Marcus saved the letter, backed it up, and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The money wouldn't last forever if he wasn't smart about it, and life had a way of throwing curveballs. But for now, tonight, he had a home. He had his daughter sleeping safely down the hall. He had a future that looked brighter than any he'd imagined possible a year ago. And he had peace with his father's memory. He walked to Sophia's room, eased the door open quietly, and watched her sleep for a moment, her small chest rising and falling, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. This was why his father had done it. This innocent trust, this peaceful sleep, this childhood free from fear. This was worth 23 years of storage fees. Worth living in poverty. Worth everything. "Thank you, Dad," Marcus whispered into the darkness, "for never giving up on us, even when it would have been easier to let go." And though there was no answer, no sign, no dramatic moment of spiritual connection, Marcus felt a weight he'd been carrying since his father's death finally lift. His father had asked for forgiveness in that letter, but what Marcus now understood was that there was nothing to forgive. William Webb had been a soldier, a father, a man who'd done his best with the broken pieces life had left him, and his best had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. Marcus closed Sophia's door softly and walked to the window, looking out over the modest neighborhood where they lived. The streetlights cast soft pools of illumination on the quiet street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed, its headlights briefly brightening the room before fading into the darkness. This was his life now. Simple, stable, saved by a father's long gamble on a better future. It wasn't the story he'd have written for himself, but it was a good story nonetheless. It was their story, the Webb family story. And it was far from over. Marcus smiled, turned from the window, and went to make himself a cup of coffee. Tomorrow, he'd call Michael Chen again. They'd become friendly over the past months, building a connection across the generation that separated their fathers. He'd work on his college assignment due Monday. He'd take Sophia to the park again if the weather held. Simple things, normal things, the kinds of things he'd once taken for granted before poverty had made everything a struggle. But he'd never take them for granted again. His father's gift hadn't just been the money, it had been the lesson that came with it. That love doesn't always wear a comfortable face. That protection sometimes looks like distance. That a man can fail at almost everything and still succeed at the one thing that matters most: taking care of his family. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he thought about the future. The money was secure in investments now, carefully managed to provide for Sophia's education and their long-term needs. He was on track to finish his degree. His relationship with Jennifer had evolved into genuine co-parenting, and Sophia, his bright, beautiful daughter, was thriving. The concrete floor of Unit 47 had held more than money. It had held hope, preserved and protected, waiting for the moment when it was needed most. And when that moment came, when Marcus had been at his lowest, when he'd been ready to give up, his father's final gift had lifted them both back into the light. As the night deepened and the apartment grew quiet around him, Marcus returned to Sophia's room one last time. He adjusted her blanket, smoothed her curls, and whispered the words his father had never been able to say, but had proven through decades of silent sacrifice. "I love you, baby girl, more than anything in this world, and I'll never let you fall. Not ever." It was a promise he could now keep, thanks to a man who'd learned too late how to show love with words, but had shown it every day through actions. William Webb might not have been the father Marcus had wanted, but he'd been exactly the father Marcus had needed. And that, in the end, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As Marcus left Sophia's room and prepared for bed himself, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Not just for the money, though that had saved them, but for the lesson, for the story, for the understanding that family is measured not in perfect moments, but in persistent love. His father had persisted. Through war and hardship, through broken relationships and lonely years, through poverty and pain, William Webb had persisted in loving his son the only way he knew how. By keeping faith. By holding on. By never giving up on the hope that someday, somehow, his sacrifice would matter. And it did. God, how it mattered. That night, Marcus slept peacefully. The kind of deep, restful sleep that comes from knowing you're safe, that the people you love are protected, that tomorrow will be better than today. In the morning, he'd take Sophia for pancakes. He'd study for his exam. He'd live his life with the second chance his father had given him. But tonight, he simply rested, held by the invisible embrace of a love that had survived everything, even death itself. The storage unit, now empty and rented to someone else, no longer held any secrets. The concrete floor had been jackhammered away, revealing the truth that had lain hidden for decades. But the real revelation hadn't been the money. It had been the understanding that love persists, that fathers and sons can find their way back to each other, even across the divide of death. That sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped not in paper and ribbon, but in time and sacrifice, and faith that someone, somewhere, will understand what it all meant. Marcus understood now. Finally, completely. He understood, and his father, wherever he was, could rest in peace, knowing his son was safe, his granddaughter was cared for, and his love had done exactly what he'd hoped it would. It had saved them, all of them, and that made every sacrifice, every difficult year, every lonely night worth it, because in the end, love is measured not by words spoken, but by promises kept. And William Webb had kept his promise. After all those years, through all that hardship, He had kept his promise to his son. "I love you too, Dad," Marcus whispered into the darkness one last time. "And I finally understand. Thank you for everything, for never letting go." The night wrapped around him like a blanket, soft and secure. And Marcus, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt completely at peace. 3 months had passed since Marcus discovered his father's hidden treasure beneath the concrete floor of storage unit 47, and life had settled into a rhythm he'd once thought impossible. But on a cold January morning, as frost painted intricate patterns across his apartment windows, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Marcus Webb?" The voice was elderly, male, with a slight tremor that spoke of advanced years. "Yes, this is Marcus. Who's calling?" "My name is Richard Stokes. I served with your father in Vietnam. I heard through the Veterans Network that William passed last year. I'm very sorry for your loss." Marcus's throat tightened. He'd met a few of his father's old army buddies at the funeral, but the name Richard Stokes didn't ring any bells. "Thank you. Did you know my father well?" There was a long pause, filled with the weight of decades. "Better than most, son. Better than most. I'm calling because there's something you need to know about that storage unit of his. Something he made me promise to tell you if anything ever happened to him." Marcus's pulse quickened. He walked to his small home office, closing the door so he wouldn't wake Sophia, who was still sleeping. "What about the storage unit? The money you found, that wasn't everything. Your father and we were involved in something back in '79, right after we got home from the war. Something that went deeper than a simple security job." Richard's voice dropped lower. "Did you find a second compartment?" "A second compartment?" Marcus repeated, his mind racing. "No, just the ammo can with the cash and documents. Then you need to go back. There's another section of that floor, further back, near the very rear wall. Your father dug 2 separate hiding places. The first one was for your immediate needs. The second one, well, that's where he kept the real secret." Marcus felt his hands begin to shake. "What kind of secret?" "The kind that needs to be shown, not told over a phone line. Can you meet me? I'm in Riverside, at the Veterans Home on Oak Street. I don't have much time left, son. Cancer. But before I go, I need to fulfill the promise I made to Bill. He was my brother in every way that mattered, and I won't let him down, even in death." 2 hours later, Marcus sat in the common room of the Veterans Home, across from a man who looked like he'd been carved from leather and gristle. Richard Stokes was 81 years old, his body wasted by disease, but his eyes were sharp and clear, burning with an intensity that belied his physical deterioration. "Your father saved my life in Vietnam," Richard began without preamble. "Twice. Once, by pulling me out of an ambush that should have killed us both. The second time, by stopping me from eating my gun 6 months after we got home. PTSD wasn't a diagnosis back then. We just called it being broken." Marcus nodded, recognizing the description of the man his father had been. "We were both broken, trying to find our way in a world that didn't want to hear about what we'd seen, what we'd done. That's when David Chen found us. He was looking for men who could keep their mouths shut, and their heads cool under pressure. Men who'd already seen the worst and survived it. My father mentioned Chen in his letter," Marcus said. "Said he did security work for him. That's the sanitized version. The truth is more complicated." Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper despite the empty room. "Chen was a broker, a middleman between parties who couldn't be seen doing business together directly. Sometimes it was legal, sometimes it skirted the edges. Your father and I provided security, but we also provided something else: deniability." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of business?" "In 1979, it was mostly about art and antiquities. Chinese artifacts that needed to leave the country quietly before the government nationalized private collections. American buyers who wanted pieces with questionable provenance. Chen facilitated those transactions. We made sure they happened without violence, without theft, without anyone getting double-crossed. And the $180,000? That was your father's cut from one transaction. Mine was the same. But there was one job, the last job we ever did, where Chen paid us in something else. Something that couldn't be converted to cash easily. Something that required time and patience to liquidate properly. Richard pulled a worn photograph from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It showed two young men in civilian clothes standing next to an ornate wooden crate. Marcus recognized his father immediately, younger but unmistakable. The other man must have been Richard. That crate contained 3 pieces, Chinese imperial jade carvings from the Qing dynasty, museum quality, worth, even back then, somewhere north of $2 million. Today? Richard shrugged. 5, maybe 6 million for the set. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. Where are they? That's the question, isn't it? Chen gave us the pieces as payment, told us to sit on them for at least 20 years before trying to sell. The art market needed time to forget. Provenance needed to become murky enough that questions wouldn't be asked. Your father and I split them. He took 2 pieces, I took 1. And you've kept yours all this time? Sold mine in 2005 through a private auction house in Hong Kong. Made $1.8 million, enough to buy this spot in the home and leave something for my daughter. Your father held on to his. Waited longer. Wanted to be sure the trail was completely cold. Richard's eyes gleamed with something that might have been admiration or regret. Bill was always the more cautious one. Marcus's mind was reeling. So, under that storage unit floor, 2 jade carvings, wrapped and sealed, buried deeper than the money. Your father put the cash closer to the surface because he thought you might need it quickly. The jade was meant to be your real inheritance, your retirement, Sophia's college fund and wedding and grandchildren's future, all in one. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out more plaintive than Marcus intended. Richard's expression softened. Because he was protecting you, son. As long as you didn't know, you couldn't be implicated. The pieces aren't stolen, exactly, but their provenance is complicated. Chen had documents proving ownership, but those documents would raise questions your father didn't want you to have to answer while he was alive. The old man pulled out a thick envelope. This contains everything. The original certificates of authenticity that Chen provided. Contact information for a dealer in San Francisco who specializes in Asian antiquities and doesn't ask uncomfortable questions, and instructions for how to access the second compartment. Your father and I updated this envelope every few years, making sure the information stayed current. Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands. When did you last speak to him? 2 weeks before he died. He called me from the hospital. Knew he didn't have long. Made me swear I'd contact you if you found the first cash. Said if you were smart enough and determined enough to break through that concrete, you deserved to know about the rest. Richard smiled sadly. He was proud of you, Marcus. Talked about you and Sophia all the time in those last years. Wished things had been different between you two. I wish that too, Marcus whispered. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 men connected by a ghost. Finally, Richard spoke again. There's one more thing. The jade pieces need to be sold soon. Not because of any legal timeline, but because I won't be here much longer to verify the story if questions come up. And you'll want someone who actually knew your father, who can testify to his character and the legitimate nature of how he acquired them. How long do you have? 3 months. Maybe 4. So if you're going to do this, do it now. Get the pieces, contact the dealer, and let me help close this chapter properly. Marcus nodded slowly. The weight of this new revelation settling onto shoulders that had only recently learned to carry hope instead of despair. Thank you for keeping your promise to him. Bill Webb was the best man I ever knew. Broken, like we all were, but still the best. Making sure his son was taken care of was the least I could do. Richard extended his hand, and Marcus shook it. feeling the paper-thin skin and prominent bones. "Go get what's yours, son, and live the life your father wanted for you." That night, after ensuring Sophia was asleep and calling Danny to explain he needed help with one more job, Marcus returned to Riverside Storage. Carol, the facility manager, raised her eyebrows when he explained he needed access to Unit 47 again, but she didn't ask questions, just handed him a key to the now empty unit. Danny arrived with his truck, and together they stood in the vacant space that had once held decades of accumulated possessions. The front section where Marcus had found the ammo can was still broken up, chunks of concrete pushed to the sides, but the very back section, near the rear wall, remained intact. "You sure about this?" Danny asked, hefting the sledgehammer they'd brought. "That old man could have been spinning stories. He knew things he couldn't have known unless my father told him. Details about the money, about David Chen, about everything." Marcus pointed to the rear corner, where the concrete looked slightly different. The same telltale signs of a separate pour. "It's there. I can feel it." They worked through the night, taking turns with the hammer, breaking through concrete that was thicker than the first section, poured deeper and more carefully. Marcus's father had gone to great lengths to protect this second hiding place, and with good reason. At 4 in the morning, with both men exhausted and covered in concrete dust, Danny's sledgehammer broke through into a hollow space. They both froze, staring at the dark opening that had appeared. "Holy shit," Danny breathed. "There's actually something down there." Marcus dropped to his knees, using a flashlight to peer into the cavity. 3 feet down, wrapped in canvas and sealed in what looked like a custom-made wooden box, was a package roughly 2 feet long and a foot wide. With Danny's help, Marcus carefully extracted the box. It was heavier than he expected, solid and well made. His father had built it himself, probably in this very storage unit, taking time to create something that would protect its contents for decades. The box wasn't locked, but it was sealed with wax around the edges. Marcus broke the seal carefully, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. The lid lifted with a soft creak of wood that hadn't moved in over 40 years. Inside, wrapped in silk that had probably once been white but had aged to cream, were 2 objects that took Marcus's breath away, even in the dim light of Danny's flashlight. The first was a jade carving of a dragon, its body coiled and its head raised in eternal challenge. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every scale individually carved, every claw perfectly formed. The jade itself was a deep green that seemed to glow with inner light. The second was a carved jade mountain scene, a miniature landscape of peaks and valleys, tiny trees, and even tinier buildings, all carved from a single piece of stone. The detail was impossible, the kind of work that must have taken a master craftsman years to complete. "Are those real?" Danny whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might shatter them. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice equally hushed. "Yeah, I think they are." He carefully rewrapped the pieces and closed the box. Whatever their value, whatever complicated history they carried, they represented his father's faith in him. William Webb had buried these treasures, hidden them even deeper than the cache, waiting for the son he'd never known how to talk to find them and understand what they meant. Not just financial security, but proof that his father had always been thinking of him, planning for his future, believing that Marcus would one day stand in this storage unit and uncover every secret that had been left behind. The next morning, after grabbing a few hours of sleep, Marcus called the dealer whose information Richard had provided. Harrison Chen, no relation to David, was a 4th-generation dealer in Asian antiquities operating out of San Francisco's Chinatown. His voice was cultured, professional, and notably unsurprised by Marcus's story. "Richard Stokes called me 2 days ago," Harrison said, "told me to expect your contact. He also vouched for the pieces, said they came from his and your father's personal collection. That's good enough for me to at least take a look." They arranged a meeting for the following week. Harrison would fly to Riverside, examine the pieces in person, and if they were authentic, would facilitate a private sale through his network of collectors who valued discretion as much as provenance. I should warn you, Harrison added before hanging up. Pieces of this quality, with this history, will attract attention. Questions will be asked. My job is to have good answers ready. But once they sell, and they will sell quickly, you'll want to be prepared for sudden wealth. It changes things in ways you don't expect. Marcus thought about the $180,000 that had already changed his life. I understand. I hope so, Mr. Webb. For your sake and your daughter's, I truly hope so. The meeting took place in a secure room at a local bank, neutral territory, where Harrison could examine the pieces under proper lighting and with appropriate tools. Marcus watched nervously as the dealer, a slim man in his 50s with careful hands and watchful eyes, spent 2 hours examining every inch of the jade carvings. Finally, Harrison sat back, removed his magnifying loupe, and smiled. These are extraordinary. Qing Dynasty, probably 1,750 seconds, based on the style and the particular shade of jade. The dragon is particularly fine, imperial quality. The mountain landscape is somewhat more common but still exceptional work. What are they worth? Marcus asked, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. At auction, with full provenance, they might bring 8 to 10 million together. Through private sale, with limited provenance, I can get you 5 million within 60 days. My commission would be 20%, leaving you with 4 million. Marcus felt the room spin slightly. $4 million. Combined with what remained of the original cash, careful investment, and his growing career prospects, it was enough to never worry about money again. Enough to give Sophia everything she could ever need or want. There's one condition, Harrison continued. Richard Stokes needs to sign an affidavit confirming how these pieces were acquired and his knowledge of their history. It's not perfect provenance, but it's enough to satisfy most questions. He said he'd do that. Good. Then we have a deal. Harrison extended his hand, and Marcus shook it, sealing an agreement that would change his family's trajectory for generations. 6 weeks later, on a surprisingly warm day in early March, Marcus sat in Richard Stokes's room at the veterans' home. The old soldier had declined rapidly, his body finally surrendering to the cancer that had been eating away at him. But his mind was still sharp, and his eyes still burned with that same intensity. The sale went through, Marcus told him, taking the frail hand in his own. Harrison got 4 million for the pieces. My half of what you and Dad earned all those years ago. Richard smiled, the expression transforming his wasted face into something that might have once been handsome. Bill would be happy. He worried about you so much, Marcus. Worried he'd ruined your life by being the father he was. He didn't ruin anything. He saved everything. That's good. That's what he deserved to. Here. Richard's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. Will you do something for me? Anything. Tell people about him. About who he really was. Not the broken man at the end, but the soldier who saved his brothers. The father who spent 40 years protecting his son's future. The man who kept faith even when everything else was falling apart. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. I will. I promise. Good. Richard's eyes closed, but the smile remained. We were good men once. Your father and I. Before the war. After the war. We tried to be good men. Sometimes we succeeded. You did more than try, Marcus said firmly. You both succeeded where it mattered most. Richard died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, having fulfilled his final promise to William Webb. Marcus attended the funeral, gave a eulogy about a man he'd barely known but who had changed his life through one phone call and one revelation. Standing at Richard's grave, in the same veterans' cemetery where his father lay, Marcus understood that he now carried the story of both men. It was his responsibility to remember, to honor, and to pass on the lessons they'd taught through sacrifice and silence, and the buried treasures that spoke louder than words ever could. That night, Marcus updated the letter he'd been writing to Sophia. The letter grew longer, more detailed, more complete. It told the full story now. From Vietnam to Storage Unit 47. From jade carvings to the quiet deaths of men who'd kept faith with each other across decades. And at the end, he wrote, "Your grandfather was a complicated man, Sophia. He carried wounds that never healed, made choices that weren't always perfect, lived a life that looked small from the outside. But his love was bigger than any wound, stronger than any mistake. He loved you before you were born, loved me when I didn't know it, and left us gifts that weren't just money or jade, but faith itself. Faith that we would find what he'd hidden. Faith that we would understand what it meant. Faith that love persists, even through silence, even through concrete and earth and time. That's the real treasure he left us. Not wealth, though that came too, but faith. And now we carry that forward, you and I, living the life he made possible. Never forget where it came from. Never forget the price he paid. Never forget that sometimes love looks like distance, like sacrifice, like buried treasure, waiting to be found by the ones who matter most." Marcus saved the letter, backed it up, and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chapters. But tonight, he simply sat in the quiet apartment, listening to his daughter breathe in her sleep, and feeling the presence of the two old soldiers who'd made this moment possible. His father and Richard Stokes, brothers in arms and in the harder battles that came after, had kept faith. And now Marcus would too, for Sophia, for the generations that would come after, for the unbroken line of love that persists despite everything. That was the real legacy. Not money, not jade, but the faith that love finds a way. Always. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.